Welcome to Roommate Conflict Response Training. The first thing you should know is that most roommate conflicts are self-resolved. Residents work with each other, they figure it out. There are more conflicts than we know about because they solve it on their own. We take roommate conflicts very seriously. We know that a roommate conflict can be detrimental to one's feeling connected, to one's feeling like they belong at Miami, to one's academic success. It can have a tremendous impact on a student's experience. So when a student comes to you and says, I'm having a roommate conflict, make sure that you are not seen as dismissive of that. Even if you'll ask them, have you talked to your roommate? And they say no, and you say, well, go talk to your roommate. That can feel dismissive. You might want to probe and ask why they haven't talked to their roommate, what you can do to help them to talk to their roommate. You want to impress upon your residents that we take roommate conflicts seriously. Your first step should be to help them to self-resolve. If you can work with one resident and ask them if they've talked to their roommate, give them strategies for talking to their roommate, whether that's asking open-ended questions, asking them to look at the scenario from the other person's point of view, explaining to them I statements like, when you do this it makes me feel this, so that they can express the impact that their roommate is having on them. You can basically coach your residents to help them self-resolve, but make sure when you do that you have a plan to follow up, so that if that didn't work you can move to the next step, which is to intervene when necessary. And intervening typically means you're going to meet with both roommates because you want to make sure you're getting both sides of this story. Sometimes an RA will just call a meeting of both roommates together without having the full story, and then in the middle of the meeting you get the full story and it wasn't what the initial person told you, and that can make it more difficult for you to help resolve. So it's recommended that you meet with the parties separately and then decide, can we get together? In some cases you'll say, this is beyond reconciliation and I'm going to bring this to my supervisor's attention and they can deal with this. But usually you decide, okay, this is something that we can get over, we can work this out, and we can make this work out. You're going to want them to try to suggest solutions for resolving the conflict. Just see what they can put on the table, and then, but you should have in the back of your pocket suggestions that you want to put on the table. The things that you, even if there are things where you have to make declarative statements about each of the roommates, and saying, well, this has been your role, this has been your role, this was a problem, this was a problem. And here's how I think you should resolve it, and here are the solutions or the steps that we should take. And those steps could include things like more specifically revisiting the roommate agreement. It could be agreements to talk to each other. It could be suggesting to them that they meet for lunch twice in the next week. And you give them specific questions on what to talk about and topics to talk about at lunch. It could be they're just not spending enough time together and getting to know each other. That might generate the respect that it takes to have a successful roommate relationship. So there's all sorts of solutions you can suggest for resolving the conflict. Once you agree on the solutions, you want to outline it very specifically, enumerate it for them. You're going to do this, this, and this. You're going to do this, this, and this, and that's the plan. Whenever you resolve or help students with a roommate conflict, you want to communicate that with your supervisor. Your supervisor may want you to write an incident report about what's going on, but certainly there should be some verbal, at the very least, verbal communication with your supervisor about a conflict that you've resolved. You want to follow up with the residents. Do not go by the mantra of no news is good news. No news in a case of a roommate scenario might mean that it's just festering. It might mean that one of the parties is just saying, well, I tried and this didn't work, so I'm just going to live in misery. You want to be intentional. Put it on, even if you have to put it on your calendar to remind you in a week to follow up specifically with both parties and say, hey, how's it going? Then it's such an important step. A couple topics about roommate conflict intervention. You've got to remember your impartiality. And what is a common experience is that one student will come to you and explain the story from their point of view, and you embrace their point of view. You view it as truth, you view it as only one side of the story, and there may be a previous relationship that their roommate already thinks that you have a better relationship with them. And your role is to make sure that you are impartial, that both roommates find you to be helping their point of view get brought to light. So impartiality is important. Another topic that's important is to understand the idea of passivity. Passivity is problematic. Here's what I mean by that. Imagine you have a roommate who is clearly being disruptive. He or she is not respecting the space, coming home late, making noise, music, friends, guests, whatever the problems are. There's clearly one resident who is who's causing a problem. But the roommate who's reporting it has a responsibility in this situation. They have to be able to go to that roommate and say, when you do this, it affects me in this way. They can't, and they can't say, well, I let them do that. They asked me if they could have, the boyfriend stay over every night of the week, and I said yes. Well, that's very passive behavior when, in reality, she didn't want the boyfriend to stay over. Passivity is problematic, and often in roommate conflict mediation, you're working with the one who is being too passive and helping them to become more assertive with their needs in the situation. Threatening behavior is a trigger for you. If anyone feels threatened, if you observe something that you think could be threatening, you have to immediately bring that to your supervisor's attention. Because in some cases we may offer someone a temporary respite from the roommate's situation while we find a longer-term solution, or we may involve the police, or the resident director might have a direct conversation with the parties involved. But you should not have to deal with any sort of threatening behavior amongst the roommates. You got to have, it's kind of nuanced, but you got to know when it's going well and when it's not going well. And when it's not going well, you should do a direct referral to the resident director. Let them know that, hey, if this doesn't seem like it's going well, I don't think I'm being all that effective in this. Let's bring in whoever your supervisor is and let them handle it. And they can, it's not like at that point you're shut out as the RA. You may be a part of the final resolution, but you may need some support from the resident director. So some roommate conflicts can easily be mediated by the RA, and some require more attention, or they're more complicated, or there's complicating factors like parental involvement, and the resident director should be brought in those matters. There's two resources you need to review before you take the training quiz. The first is the roommate agreement. You're familiar with this because when you moved in your first year, you were asked by your RA to complete a roommate agreement. It's a detailed document that we ask students to take seriously, and not just first-year students. All students living in the residence halls should complete a roommate agreement. Your supervisor is going to make sure that there is an account for one roommate agreement for every roommate, pair or trio or quad on your corridor. And the document is designed to get them talking about all the issues that we know from our experience play into a positive roommate relationship. So if they turn this roommate agreement into you and you're going to review it, and if they have not put considerable time into it, for example, what about guests? And if they say, we can have them, well, that's not good enough. You should give it back to them and say, no, when can you have guests? How many guests can you have? What's the condition? What's the timing? When do we ask? All of these things come into play and have to be taken seriously. And what we have found for sure is that the RAs who put more time and effort into the roommate agreements have fewer roommate conflicts down the line. The other thing about the roommate agreement is that it's a working, living, breathing document. Students are asked to fill it out in the first week. Well, a lot's going to change between the first week and the second week. and the third week and the third month. So sometimes you have to say, let's revisit the roommate agreement. You should review the copies, and the copies will be provided for you by the central office to hand out on the first day that students move in. So that's the first resource. The second is the Roommate Success Guide. This is an online guide connected to the Office of Residence Life webpage. You should go and review it now. And it has the Roommate Bill of Rights. It has suggestions. It has good questions roommates should ask each other. It has all sorts of resources for roommates, and you should be familiar with those because you may need to use them as tools for helping resolve a roommate conflict. Okay, so once you've reviewed those two documents, you're ready to take the follow-up quiz. Thank you.